Malynda Hale. Hi.
Hi.
So lovely to see you through the screen.
Yes, you too.
I am really pumped to have you in this space to just see
Oh,
where this conversation goes. I feel like you are full of creativity and wisdom, and just I I flock to the earnestness and the vulnerability and the outspokenness of who you are as a human. So, anyway,
mm.
for anybody who doesn't know who you are, who are you today?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I am a singer and an actress, just by nature. That's what I've done my whole life, pretty much. But activism really became a forefront of the platforms that I have. Really, in the wake of like Black Lives Matter movement, and in 2016, with the election and everything. And so now I've really used my platform just to even more so stand up publicly for any marginalized group, really. And I'm just trying to show that it's possible to hold space for everybody.
Yeah.
And in the work that you do and how you move through the world, I know it can be exhausting
Yeah.
at some points, but I'm trying to show that it is possible. So that's really who I am. I always just say I'm a singer, songwriter, actress, and an activist, and that's just how I move through the world and
Yeah.
everything that informs every move that I do.
Well, what you're putting out is being received. So I
Mm,
feel like I've seen all of that from the creative parts of yourself,
thank
but
you.
also on the advocacy part of
Yeah,
yourself. I'm curious, just on the performer side of it, how did you get to that? Was that like a thing that started when you were a kid? Wh-
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up singing in church. That was
Okay.
like my age old story. And then did a lot of musical theater in school,
Where
did
did you
commercial
grow
acting
up?
classes. I grew up in Santa Barbara, California, which is a whole
Okay.
story in itself. I don't know if you've ever been to Santa Barbara,
I have.
but very not diverse. I will put it
Hmm.
that way. But I grew up doing a lot of music and theater, and then I went to college for classical voice and minored in musical theater. And then after that, I really did a lot of touring with my band and as a solo artist,
Yeah.
um, just performing around Southern California, Northern California, doing house concerts, all that things, releasing albums, and doing theater on occasion. I always loved theater, but it was never the goal.
Yeah.
I loved the community. I loved being a part of it. But really releasing albums and touring was what I wanted to do. Music industry changed a lot, and so did I. So I wouldn't say that I put music on the back burner, but I just kind of adjusted my dreams to fit the person that I was becoming.
Yeah.
And I that's another thing to tell artists, it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you failed in any way. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't have made it in the way that you thought, but sometimes you just have to adjust.
Yeah.
And I adjusted even more so when I became a mom and when I got married and all of that, because that obviously changes things for you in a positive way. Honestly, I actually feel like I work a lot harder now that I have a daughter.
I would imagine you do.
Because oh my gosh, yeah. But also, I mean, not just in terms of balancing, but in terms of just wanting to show her what's possible.
Yeah.
So yeah, performing has always been a huge thing for me. And I have done, TV, film, commercials, all of that stuff. And it's been great. And I've found different versions of myself in different facets of performing, which I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed and been entering into even a new version of myself. I just directed a short film for the first time.
Yes.
So having like a directorial debut and using all of the skills that I've kind of gained up to this point was really, really interesting to see. But yeah, I just encourage artists to try everything because you
Yeah.
never know where you might shine or where you may be needed that you didn't know you were needed before. And that's what I've really enjoyed in terms of the journey of performing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. I always feel like getting context for somebody, even
Yeah,
just like a little bit, is helpful for the trying to get more of a full picture. I'm
absolutely.
curious how you find in yourself, or how you give yourself permission to lean into the newer hats, the curiosity that you have towards, say, this directing, path that now
Yeah.
you're embarking
Mhm.
upon, or um, the activism that you started putting on, like all of these. How are you? What do you do? Is there like a specific habit that you have, or is it just like, no, I feel it in my gut and I try and I give, but give towards it?
Yeah, I love this question because I would definitely say the earlier version of myself was resistant to change
Okay.
and resistant to new versions because I definitely was like growing up, I want to be Whitney Houston. Like
Yeah.
that was my goal in life,
Yeah.
right? And then as I started to get older and be a part of the music industry more, I was like, I don't want to be Whitney Houston. Like,
Mhm.
look what you did to Whitney,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
like
Yeah,
you know what I
clearly.
mean? So I as I've gotten older, I've definitely just kind of learned to let go and let God. Like really
Yeah.
my faith informs a lot of the moves that I have and just trusting and some and I'm a very, very spiritual person. My faith is very, very important to me. And I have been really in this mindset the last 5 years, just like if something comes up and it feels right,
Mm.
just do it.
Where do you
Like,
feel it in you?
it really is like in my chest, like it's a heart thing, you
Okay.
know? I feel like when something's in your gut that's almost like, maybe you shouldn't.
Mm.
That's for, at least for me and like how I listen to my body. But when I feel like in my chest and my heart, it's like my heart swells like this is going to be a great thing. This is going to be a good thing. This is going to
Yeah.
be a growth
Does it
thing
make
for
you
me.
sweaty and, like, excitable, or does it fill you with some kind of feeling? Or you just
It fills me for sure.
okay.
It's hard to put into words. It's not like tangible,
Yeah.
right? But I have definitely learned the difference between the good and the bad feelings. And I think when you're a younger artist, your desire and your hunger sometimes overpowers your
Yeah.
intuition, right? And so you end up making a lot of mistakes, which is fine. We're supposed to make mistakes and
Yeah.
grow from them. But I think the older I've gotten, I've been able to discern the difference.
Yeah.
So when I feel that like really like fulfilling, heartfelt feeling, I'm like, okay, this is something I need to do.
Yeah.
But I've learned to say no also, which is a big thing for me because I felt like, oh, if I say no to this, I'm going to lose this opportunity or this person's not going to work with me again or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But saying no, I've learned not only protects you, but it also protects them because I don't want to say yes to doing something that I'm not going to be able to give my full
That
self
part.
to.
Mhm.
And then I do subpar work and then they really won't want to work with me
Yeah.
again. So I think saying no has been very, very beneficial for me. I've also, and this is recently, I said yes to a lot of things that I knew I'd be able to do, but I also realized what my capacity was
Yeah.
for having a lot of things at the same time, which I think is something that we all should learn because we do have a limit. We can think that we're
Mhm.
superheroes as
Yeah.
much as we want, but your body will let you know very quickly, hey, you need to slow down. So I've learned to really listen and tune in and decipher between those things.
Yeah. I ask about where you feel it just because this has come up over a couple different podcast episodes where I
Mhm.
have guests who come on and they talk about that, like, inner knowing, and I find it fascinating for all of us where that lives,
Yeah,
because it really isn't a one-size-fits-all situation,
sure.
um, but learning to listen to it wherever it comes up or being curious about, oh, I keep feeling this thing here in my body when
Yeah.
this kind of thing happens. What is it actually telling me? And starting to
Mhm.
be excited about wanting to cultivate more of an understanding within ourselves of like
Absolutely.
our inner compass, wherever it lives, actually is informing us and knows more. Like the body keeps the score, is,
Yeah, yeah.
it lives there. Um, I also love that idea of learning your capacity rather than your
Mm.
like your I don't know if the word is limits necessarily, but it feels like the counter of it because
Mhm.
capacity feels, for me at least, like it's expansive,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
limit feels somehow is exactly in the word like limiting.
Productive.
But
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, but they are talking about the same thing. And to think of capacity as something that you're choosing versus limit is something imposed on you
Yeah, yeah.
feels, like a wonderful distinction or a shift in our agency of choice,
Absolutely,
you know?
absolutely, I completely agree. I love how you determined between the 2, but that's very, very true.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there is a difference, yeah.
Because it has been for me too, just like the idea of the no actually being a yes, as in me saying no is saying yes to the things that I actually want to say yes to, or me
Yeah,
saying no to, as you kind of said, like others who, if we had agreed to this, wouldn't be a collaborative experience, then no one's really quote unquote winning in it. Like everyone, by saying no when it isn't right for you and your heart and your gut and your body and your mind and your soul and all of the things, it's actually a release.
Yeah.
And there isn't limitation to that. It actually is expansive. Not saying this is easy, but like
No, yeah, but absolutely.
it's a shift.
It is.
Thank you for sharing all of that in
Yeah.
that way. I'm curious now to, if you're cool, to dive into you being able to harness what you know and feel, and then giving of yourself to it, as in speaking out, putting things into action, because that's a very different thing than just like, I
Mhm.
feel this, I know this in my heart, and then I'm stifled because of X, Y, and Z reasons surrounding me, and I don't feel
Mhm.
empowered to or safe to or insert word here. And we don't give ourselves that permission.
Mhm. Mhm.
How do you do that for yourself?
Oh gosh. This is a great question. I think I'll start with just lessons that I learned from my mom specifically.
Okay.
Um, both of my parents are wonderful, but my mom and I are very much the same person.
Isn't that funny,
The
like,
same
how that
yes.
happens?
It's wild, and it's funny also now having a daughter
Mm.
and acting exactly how my mom was
Oh my
with
god.
me and my sister. I'm like, "Oh god, I'm
Yeah.
becoming you," right?
Oh boy.
But, it basically kindness and empathy cost you nothing, right? And
Mhm.
that's just how I've always felt, and I think even being an artist, performing and being in this world, you meet so many different people.
Yeah.
And it should expand your worldview a little bit because meeting people from different backgrounds and meeting people with different ethnicities and cultures should expand your worldview and make you a more well rounded person. And my mom has always been my dad's definitely a hermit. He like if he never talked to another human being, he'd probably be fine. He's just definitely like, "I'm good, right? I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
my
yeah.
family, I'm happy," which it's fine. It's just so funny. He's an older man, like, it's fine.
I love it.
But my mom is a very much a social butterfly the way that I am, and I love people and love communicating, but it's really the simple thing of, like, being kind and having empathy and learning other people's stories. And so using my platform and finding the time and the space to do it has always just felt natural for me. It's never felt forced or trying to piggyback on a movement or use it for social clout in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. It doesn't make sense to me when people don't show up for other people.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a very progressive Christian household. I've been a Christian my whole life. I hate what, unfortunately, Christian has become in
Mm.
this country because, in my mind, it has always been following someone who led with love.
Mm.
And that's what I always try to do. I'm clearly not perfect, and I definitely get into social media arguments. I try not to, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's impossible sometimes. But I think just leading with love and trying to be there for everybody, it doesn't cost you anything. I feel like it
Yeah.
takes more effort to be actively against people and try to tear them down and oppress them in any way, shape, or form when you could just love them and live your life, right? So it doesn't take anything out of my day, out of my career trajectory, out of my personal life to just make a statement and say, hey, like, pay attention to what's happening, show up for these people. These people are hurting. It takes nothing. And I wish more people would realize that it really doesn't cost them anything to just show up and be kind and
Yeah.
have empathy.
Yeah. I think I know for me, what I keep feeling like I see, and I know I feel within myself sometimes too, is with society the way that it is, especially in this like cancel culture that we are really deeply embedded in at the moment, I found,
Hmm.
where we're so quick to judge, we're so quick to say you're wrong, we're so
Yeah.
quick to um, know more than somebody as opposed to lean in with curiosity. And even if you have specific beliefs and values, just to even listen. Like, I feel like these core skill sets that define what it means to be a human versus, just an
Yeah.
animal, we're losing. Just given the scope of how quick things move, and also social media being a rapid place that is, I mean, like, all of it. And
Mhm.
so, I find that it's the fear around saying the wrong thing or acting too soon because then more information comes out is a pertinent thing. And also that some people are really vicious on the internet specifically, and to be able to take a stance at something requires a really tough skin and an emotional
Mhm.
fortitude
Mhm.
that frankly shouldn't be in conjunction with one speaking out and advocating. And I think for me, that's where it gets really tricky, where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you could be speaking out on behalf of what feels so obviously right and feels so obviously loving and kind and inclusive and progressive and whatever the other words are. And yet
Yeah.
there's still somehow vitriol that comes for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the navigation that has me really plagued by speaking out sometimes when I do
Mhm.
get that feeling of you have to,
Yeah.
or stunted in the way that I do it because and I'm not somebody who normally cares about what anybody thinks, but because when it comes to these real things, there are such polarizing, that for me is where it gets tough.
It is tough, and yeah, I mean, there's going to be vitriol and hate no matter what you do. I
Yeah,
mean, I always joke, like, when, obviously when Obama was in office, I was like, "This man could cure cancer and people would have a problem with it."
100%.
You know what I mean? It
100%.
doesn't matter, that's always going to be an opposition. I think that people have to get to a level, if they can, of selflessness, and that's what it really requires, is not worrying about the response you're gonna get, but knowing that the positive response is going to be bigger and more important, right?
Mhm.
Everyone tells me it's so funny that, "Oh my god, I can't believe, how much you're speaking out for the Jewish community, like, you get so much hate." And I'm like, "Okay, but, like, they're gonna
Yeah,
find a reason to hate me anyway." Like, I'm
yeah,
literally a black female married to a white man,
yeah,
and I'm in the performance space. Like, there's
yeah,
going to be something they're gonna find a problem with, right?
yeah,
So, it doesn't really make a difference to me. Speak out for the LGBTQ community. I'm gonna get hate, doesn't matter. The positivity that I receive and the thanks that I receive is the whole reason,
yeah,
right? And I understand that it's hard, but what I have found is that if people have 2 thumbs and a social media, platform, they're gonna find a way.
yeah,
So, I think it just comes down to, if you know that something is right, no matter how hard it may feel or may be, just do the right thing. And also, it's okay to mess up. And you can lead with, "I wanna say something, but I don't know what to say."
yeah,
I think if you are organic and authentic in that wording, I think that people will receive it a little differently. And I think I would rather see people speak up and say, "I want to say something, but I don't know what to say," than to be
yeah,
silent. Then at least you're trying.
yeah,
But we can't be so afraid of getting it wrong that we don't even make an attempt.
yeah,
And I understand it though, for sure, because I was definitely there years ago. I was like, I don't know if I should say anything about this. I don't know if I should say anything about this." But then I just realized, at the end of the day, what's right? What is right? What
yeah,
is what is the good thing to do? Kindness and empathy don't really cost me anything. It costs that person more to come at me with vitriol and hate than it
yeah.
is for me to say I stand with this community.
Yeah. Have you found that by speaking up, and this is a really weird and uncomfortable question, so I apologize if it comes out strangely
No,
as it
no.
comes out of my brain. Have you found that it actually has gotten you into rooms as an artist more, or has it
Interesting.
gotten you into rooms that were unexpected as an artist because of it? Or has or and I guess you don't know necessarily what rooms it's kept you out of, but I guess the opposite of that, like, do you feel like you speaking out on behalf of some of these communities have actually maybe severed the possibility of you in theory working with people, which arguably if we go on the opposite side, like you wouldn't want to work with these people anyway because they clearly don't understand like what you're
Right,
speaking on behalf of, but
for
that.
sure. Um, I mean, I don't know. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? It's possible, but I think I only know the positive things,
Yeah,
right? Because those are the people that actually contact me. I will never know if I've been kept out of a room, or kept out of a meeting because of what I have stood up for. I
yeah,
will absolutely never know that. I do know that I've gotten into rooms that have nothing to do with art that were unexpected. And that was really a blessing, just because people appreciated my views
yeah,
and just being myself, not even, portraying a character or singing a song. It was just me, Melinda Hale, being myself and speaking up, that has gotten me into unexpected advocacy and activism rooms
yeah,
and platforms and panels and speeches and all that stuff. So that was also a very unexpected trajectory that I didn't expect. and it's been beautiful, it's been
Yeah.
wonderful. Um, but I think I wouldn't say it's affected my art or in any way, shape, or form, good or bad. And if it has affected good, no one said anything. You know what I mean? So they've just called me in, and hopefully it's just because they think I'm talented. But if it's helped a little bit, great. But I have no idea, honestly. I
Yeah.
know, and that's not a weird question at all. It is a very, very valid question.
Well, I think the reason I ask it is, and you mentioned it yourself, you have been speaking out on behalf of the Jewish community, which, thank you. I don't
Of
represent the whole
course.
Jewish
No,
community,
of
but
course.
as a Jew in this particular
Of
space,
course.
and we don't necessarily need to go down this path, but I know it feels really isolating for this particular movement, when you are in the social space. And I had spoken out, about the Funny Girl release that had
Mhm,
happened, and I kinda did exactly what you talked about, which is, like, I don't know how to talk about this, and I have to though. Like that
mhm.
was literally the frame that I it was in my body. I couldn't not I was so flushed and my heart rate was up and I knew that it was like if I don't get this off my chest, I actually
Yeah,
won't be able to sleep. Like it's
yeah.
literally
It'll
that. It
sit
just
with you. It'll
is
sit with you
yeah, it was
forever, yeah.
plaguing me. And it
Yeah.
was like I don't have the words necessarily to do this and I don't know the right way to say it, but also like this is me and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and where I'm coming from and it went quite viral in a way that
Mhm,
I was
mhm.
not expecting at all and I'd never experienced before, which was even weirder because I feel like maybe people who are used to that, it's just like there's like a thick skin that comes with
Yeah.
like, that movement, the ups and downs of like it happens really quick and then it dies out and then the next thing happens really quick and it's kind of like
Yeah.
a weird hit and you just
Yes.
kind of it all becomes numb. But I had never had that.
Mhm.
And it was this really weird thing that a huge reason I didn't want to say something was because I feared that it would somehow, as an artist, prevent me from doing the creative work I wanted to do. That somehow, me being an outspoken Jewish woman with opinions, like, was
Yeah.
somehow going to the onus of that was gonna be put on me in a way that was gonna, like,
Mhm,
follow me into rooms and or
mhm.
not into rooms that wouldn't now be open, and then it was that thing of me sitting and being like, "Okay, well, these rooms that are potentially not calling you in, you would not be doing your best work because clearly there would be something disconnected between that whole space anyway, so that's actually okay." And you would say this again, and you would say it again. You believe it in your core, and it's fundamental to, like, your people, and you're like,
Yeah.
this is not something that you would just say and not if somebody can correct me if I got something wrong, 100%, always open to that, but, like, in terms of my beliefs and my value system, like, I would say this again,
Yeah.
and it was like, "All right, well, that, is not something that's just, like, flippant in the moment."
Mhm.
But I feel like this tie of being outspoken and also being a creative who we've been taught and told to stay in your lane and don't take up the space are at odds,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely,
you know?
absolutely, and I mean, I couldn't disagree with that more because I think when you have layers to who you are, it makes you more interesting as an artist,
Yeah,
right? Because you bring more to the table and
100%.
honestly, creating a character, for example, you have other parts of your life to pull on, to pull from, to make that character real and make it authentic, and lyrics that you're singing to a song could you can give new meaning to them,
Yeah,
and make an audience hear them in a different way based on your life experience or based on the things that you're passionate about, right? I think artists that don't talk about anything are very, very boring, honestly, I'm not trying to put anybody down, but
yeah,
I just don't think it's interesting, and it could be anything, you could be passionate about cooking, like,
yeah,
just
yeah,
have something else outside of it, and you're absolutely correct, we have been conditioned to believe that you should just be your one thing that you've chosen, and that's your path, it's like they make it as simple as being a lawyer or a doctor when
right.
it's not, like, being an artist is an artist, it's an all-encompassing thing, and create there's so much that you can create underneath that. And so when I have seen other artists speak out, it makes me actually interested in the work that they're doing
Yeah.
from their artistry, right? Because they're an interesting person to me. So I really just encourage people to find something that they're passionate about outside of their art that draws people in a different way, because then you're also capitalizing on two different audiences,
Yeah.
right? Or three different audiences or four different audiences. For myself, I have people that know me from my music. I have people that know me from acting. Then I have people that really know me from activism. And now they're all kind of intertwined, and that's been
Yeah.
really, really wonderful to have them blend together. And people that know my music are like, "Oh, I love how much you're speaking out." Or people that know me from activism are like, "I didn't know you sang." Like, it's great. I
Yeah.
love that. So I really just encourage people to try and find that one thing, one additional thing, or two additional things.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, you're tapping on this thing that it's like these are parts of who you are. These aren't
Yeah,
things that you're just putting on for the sake of being interesting. It's
right.
like you are interesting, inherent of the fact that these are things that make up who you are.
Absolutely.
We
Absolutely.
forget that in order to be storytellers, like we are putting on, in essence, circumstances that aren't yours, but they have to come through you. Like that is
Yeah.
the point. If you are not accessing all parts of yourself to be able to tell these stories,
Yeah.
and like, what are you doing?
Absolutely.
I know when I teach and I coach and especially in master classes, like people are always asking, like, well, like people talk about like self-care, like, what do you do? Or like, I'm feeling really burnt out. Like, how do I stay motivated? It's like anytime any version of that question comes up, it's like, what are your hobbies? Not to be interesting. Like, what do you actually enjoy doing
Yeah.
besides this? So that
Yeah.
God forbid we're in another pandemic or we're in a strike like we are now, and the whole entire industry is dictated by not you. Like,
Yes.
what are you
Yeah.
doing to keep yourself satiated, to find joy and creativity elsewhere? Where
Yeah.
are you learning new things, and where are you getting inspiration so that you can then
Yeah.
bring it into the craft?
Mhm.
I think we also forget that, like, we're living in a world where there's so much,
There's so much.
like,
There's too much, but
arguably 100% too much. And like, how do you choose to engage with it?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
also the choice that we have. Um, I'm curious for yourself if you purposefully on the day are like, okay, I've been leaning so far into the advocacy hat for a while. I need to now veer more into music land. Or is it more just like every day I really want to like put in a little bit of these things, or it's actually not even a choice. You just follow your gut.
I just follow my gut, honestly. And sometimes I'm just sharing things about my family or
Yeah.
funny things that my daughter said. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's very important to show that you're a real person, you
Yeah.
know? And I get that obviously a lot of social media is manufactured and it's a highlight reel, and that could be some people's brand, and that's, not knocking them whatsoever. But I will say for myself, what works for me and what I love to see is just authenticity. I
Mhm.
think it's so, so important to just show that you are real, that you have good days, you have bad days, or that you love just going for walks, or you, had one of your nailed it moments in the kitchen. You're like, I tried to
Yeah.
make a cake and it looks like this. I love that part. And then you see a video of them singing or acting, you're like, oh my gosh. And then you see another part of them. I just love seeing all the layers of humanity in people. And I think
Yeah.
it's a really beautiful thing. And that's what I try to show.
Yeah. When it comes to topics or, um, things that you don't know as much about, but you do wanna speak up on, do you research? Do you have other resources that you use? Like, how do you, tune into, um, I guess, like, deciphering noise from fact?
Yeah. Oh no, that's a great question. I do research. I try to listen to, even though they're very limited, bipartisan media. It's not a
Yeah.
lot of choices
Good
these days.
luck.
Yeah, not a
That
lot
in
of
of itself is
choices.
like the research project of trying to find
Oh
it,
my
but
gosh. Yeah,
mhm.
there's this great grid. I forget what it's called, but it does show you which ones are more left leaning, more right leaning, and which ones are kind of right in the middle. And oddly enough, they're all like not in our country. Like
Yeah.
BBC is one of the most bipartisan media things that just report the facts. And I'm like, I have to go to the UK to find out what's happening in my own country, but okay. Um, so yeah, I try to do bipartisan media, but specifically things that are happening within other marginalized communities. I try to just talk to people within those communities and have conversations and understand. I would say about a year and a half ago was when I really started having conversations with my Jewish friends, like, what is going on? Like, I
Yeah.
didn't know anti-Semitism was this big of a deal. Like,
Yeah.
I had like, because I'm always like, why? Like, what did Jewish people do? Like, why are you upset?
Well, yeah,
Like,
go
you know
back
what I
to
mean? But
yeah, yeah.
that's really what my thought has been. And I'm not saying that, like, for Black people, I understand that the vitriol that's towards Black people, but the history of this country has been black and white,
Yeah,
literally, right?
100%.
So
Mhm.
I understand that history, that there is going to always be contention between those communities in terms of left and right, black and white. I get that. We know that. That is what this country is built on,
Mhm.
starting with slavery, right? But for me, trying to understand why there is such animosity towards the Jewish community in this country, I was so beyond confused because it made absolutely no sense to me. Because I'm like, what is the history
Right.
here? So that was really eye opening for me, and especially as people were posting more about the situation with Palestine and Israel, and wanting to understand that, which it's such a nuanced conversation with, I was very ignorant to. And having those conversations and realizing that all of my friends are like, no, I'm pro Palestinian and pro Israel, like, I just want
Yeah.
peace. And I'm like, oh gosh, I had no idea about the situation. So it's really talking to people and getting to know them, and hearing their stories and their backstories, and hearing from their families, stories about their families, because it gives you just a different perspective. And I
Yeah.
think obviously you can get facts, quote unquote, from the media, right? But really talking to people that experience things firsthand is
Yeah.
important. People will assume that they know things about the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. The organization is something different. We won't talk about the organization because I know that there have been issues with that, but the movement, right? Understanding what it's about. Have you talked to a Black person? Do you have any
Yeah.
Black friends? Have those conversations with people to really fully understand what somebody's lived experience is, because you're not going to get a nuanced, authentic, heartfelt conversation and experience retold on the news. You're just not going
100%.
to, right? They're
Mhm.
going to change things for shock factor, or adjust things for, honestly, clickbait and for watches.
Mhm.
They're not going to give you that, my great 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 grandfather was a slave, or my
Yeah.
great great grandfather or my great grandfather survived the Holocaust. They're not going to give you that,
Yeah.
right? And so when you have those real stories that you can hear from people, it should really, I would think, invoke something in you to be like,
Yeah.
oh, this is a serious thing. So that was really my journey. And it's been my journey, honestly, with the LGBTQ community. Now, granted, I grew up in a progressive Christian household, so that was never an issue for me. I went to a conservative Christian college, and I
Mhm.
was so confused by how people responded to the LGBTQ community, because that's not how I was raised.
Yeah.
My parents have always been very loving and accepting and open and welcome. And I did musical theater. So, like,
Yeah.
it was like, I
Yeah.
was like, what's the issue? Right. So I think just expanding your circle, drawing your circle wider, and talking to people and getting to know their lived experiences, that's really what the key is.
Yeah. I think it goes back to kind of what we had touched upon earlier of just, like, this idea of, like, listening,
Yeah.
and it feels like a lost skill set, or it's being a
You're
lost skill
telling
set.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, or, like, the way that people think that they're listening is just hearing as opposed to,
Yes.
like, receiving
Hmm.
and actually just listening. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just it feels so different, and I think what you're sharing is this idea that you're going into these conversations wanting to learn, wanting to receive, not being on any form of defensive from the get. It's like, cool, I have what I think I know. Maybe I don't know, or maybe I will learn something different and that will contribute to what I do know. And there's an openness to that kind of listening that is antithetical to the but I'm listening to you. No, I'm
Yeah.
listening. It's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 this isn't an argument. This is a conversation. Like,
Right.
I'm sharing, you're sharing. Let's
Yeah.
all meet together and actually see our shared humanity, or where we can find that overlap, or
Yeah.
maybe the gaps in that then we can repair, or we can try to do something about. um that the listening in it really, I think that's where my heart breaks a lot because
Mhm.
it does seem like so much is lost because people are unwilling to look inward about the way in which they engage with others.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also when you are going into these conversations, it's not going in with knowing that there's a possibility you could be wrong because nobody wants to
Mhm.
be wrong, right?
Right.
And so if you don't go in just open and you already have your prepared responses before you even hear what the person says, then no progress will ever get
That
made. But and this is even like the tagline for my podcast, but it's everything begins with the conversation. Like if we can't
yeah.
have a conversation, we're not going to make any progress
Yep.
whatsoever. But people again, like you said, their effective communication is lost, active listening is lost, the fear of being wrong, always wanting to be right. Like it's
Yeah.
all of these variables really affect just how we engage with one another nowadays. And it is a shame because I do feel that I think, fundamentally there will always be one side or the other. Like we'll have differences for sure. That's just life.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, like the basic things, we all kind of want the same we want to have our families be safe. We want to be able to provide for them. We want to thrive in whatever career we're choosing. And we don't want there to be any form of hate or racism. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that are fine with that, right? But I think the majority of people don't want that, right? But if you're not listening, and I even said this in a speech I did recently, is that we can never find out that we all want to get to the same destination if we're not listening to what the other person's route may be.
Yeah.
And it's very apparent in social media. And again, social media is a blessing or a curse. We met on social media. That's a
Literally.
positive, right?
Exactly.
But because of social media, it has allowed for no active listening and
Mhm.
everybody to have an opinion and express it in whatever way that they want.
Mhm.
And again, going back to kindness and empathy cost you nothing, we just need to learn how to converse with one another. And if we disagree, we disagree. But it is very disheartening to see that we are disagreeing in such in a vitriolic way. It is a shame. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and it's these, like it's these spaces that I it's times in the vitriol and in the division of it, I it's really hard to not, like, slip into full despair around, like,
Right.
the human condition, which again ties back to, like, why I've chosen to not chosen, I mean, it chose me, I guess, or, like, why I continue engaging with being an artist, it's
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
it is the human condition, and I think there's complexity to the human condition, which is, again, what makes it so unique and special and wild and a playground of, whatever, but it breaks my heart that, as you said, like, we are all really trying to just, like, do the basic of, like, let me provide, let there be shelter, let there be food, let there be like,
Yeah.
we're all trying to do that, and yet somehow we're missing each other. And I try not to get bogged down by that because that's just a really sad space to sit in for so long. And why social media breaks are helpful, and why like
Mhm.
stepping out and being in the mountains is my happy place. And I try to do that as much as I can to be reminded that like this planet exists and has existed far longer than I have and ever
Yeah,
will. Um, and there's spaces that are more expansive than what our human minds can comprehend, and just that
yeah,
reminder is helpful, but when it comes to these little the rifts in it all, it really can feel very bleak. And I guess you seem to be quite well adjusted in those bleak moments, but I imagine every once in a while there's a flood of it at some point. How do you find yourself capable of lifting out of it? Do you have some sort of regiment of like love that you give to yourself, or you have others you call upon? Like, how do you protect yourself and also
yeah.
take care of yourself when it is a lot?
Yeah, honestly, I just have to step away from social media as a whole. I have a lot of self-care stuff from just going to get a mani-pedi or taking a
Mhm.
bath or like just watching TV with my daughter. It's just really simple things to just shut everything down. But it's really learning to put the phone down and
Yeah.
put it on silent and not looking at it. And, our phones live in our hands, right?
Yeah.
But that's just really what I have to do. And I used to think that I had to be accessible at all times, even
Yeah.
outside of social media. And I realized it's okay to not be and to not apologize. Like, sorry, I didn't respond. Like, well, this is when I'm getting to it. I wanted
Mhm.
to take a minute to myself.
I do a
And I think
thank you
that
for navigating my delayed response moment. Like, I reverse it. Just like, "Thank you for I'm gonna take
yeah,
it. I'm not
I love that.
apologizing for it, but,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
thank
yeah, yeah.
you." Yeah.
I love that. No, I love that. So yeah, I just have to step away. I just have to
Yeah.
step away because it can be very consuming and it can be very daunting and you can go down the rabbit hole of comments, which I know they always say don't look at the comments, but we
Yeah.
do anyway. We can't help it. But yeah, it's really shutting down and just being with my family or just doing things by myself, going for a walk, whatever it is, and just kind of resetting. I
Yeah.
think it's important to do every now and then and take breaks and know that it's not going to make a difference in the impact that you're making or what your life or career trajectory is going to be. If you take 4 or 5, 2 weeks, a month, whatever waves from social media, like you still exist and you
Yeah.
can always go back to it. It's not going to change anything. And I
Yeah.
think that we fear that if we're not constantly active on social media, then like we won't get this or we won't get that or it's going to matter. It doesn't matter. It does
Yeah.
not matter. You matter and how you are showing up in the world matters. So if you're not well because of these things, you need to step away from them and take care of yourself so you can
Yeah.
show up fully. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. For anybody who is, like, wanting to be braver, obviously, like, you can listen to yourself and you can just take the risk and whatever. We can, put it on, like, a timeline of the things. But what would you say would be like first steps of somebody who is like, I've been sitting on these feelings for a really long time, or I am somebody who actually is really passionate about these things and nobody really knows it because I've been too afraid to speak on it. What would be some thoughts that you might have about somebody harnessing their bravery and stepping into expressing?
Yeah, I love this because I do know that that fear lies within a lot of people. I think honestly, and it's going back to what I said earlier, start by saying that you want to say something, but you don't know what to say. And I think that you will be met with a lot of people that probably feel the same way.
Yeah.
And then you will find connection within those people, and they'll probably want to talk to you. Well, like, this is how I was feeling about this, or oh, I'm so glad that you feel that way too. I think just starting anywhere is a good starting point, honestly. You don't have to go in heavily and go really deep and say too much. But I think acknowledging that you care, acknowledging that something matters to you is always the first step. You don't need to, again, go deep, but just saying, I really care about this. I don't know how to express how I'm feeling. I don't know if anybody's feeling the same way, but I just wanted to say something that this really does matter to me. And it's that simple. It really is
Yeah.
that simple because then you're opening up a conversation with other people, like I said, that might feel the same way. And you never know what it could go from there. And you could end up having private conversations with people.
Yeah.
I think also the thought is that a lot of people think that the first step has to be public. It doesn't. You can just start these conversations with your friends. Like,
Mhm.
hey, how do you guys feel about this? I've wanted to say something, but I just figured I'd ask you. Let's talk about it. Start small. It doesn't have to be a public declaration, but you could be having a conversation with somebody who also is afraid to speak out. And those small conversations could lead to bigger conversations and then could lead to you wanting to have a public platform about it. But not saying anything, I think we just have to get that out of our mindset and get that out of our body. And even if it's just one person that you talk to, at least
Yeah.
you're releasing it a little bit, because
Yeah.
if it sits with you too long, it'll again, like you said, I love your word, to plague you.
Yeah.
So yeah, just start small.
I love that reminder that it doesn't have to be a public declaration. I think we often think, and I'll speak on behalf of myself, that, just because we have an opinion or a value or something that we believe in, it needs to be like shared with the world. And it's like,
Right.
no, no. I mean, in fairness, like my close inner circle know my opinions and feelings, like, maybe to a fault. And I think for me, it's more like I don't want to keep burdening them with that, which granted they could easily tell me like enough, Jen, and I listen.
Right.
But, so that's my own nonsense to navigate around the burden part of that. But, I think it is a helpful reminder of like your world is still your small little world, and that in of itself is a ripple effect. And if people start to know that this is even in the zeitgeist of a conversation or possible to even talk about, then maybe more
Yeah,
people will talk about it, and hopefully that continues, the ripple. But it doesn't have to be that if you're not ready for it. And yet just the speaking on it in some capacity or writing on it and then putting that somewhere, or however your form of expression lives, singing
yes,
about it, then dancing, whatever, uh, then that still is releasing it into little pockets of the ether, and it doesn't have to be a
absolutely,
full declaration, which
absolutely.
what a helpful reminder to us
Yeah,
all.
absolutely.
As we begin to wind down our time, is there anything on your heart, your mind, your spirit that we didn't talk about that you would love to share or navigate?
Again, like I said, I am one of those people that my faith informs everything that I do, and I come from beliefs that lead with love and kindness and empathy. And I think that's also a good place to start. Just be
Yeah.
kind. I just feel like people make it so difficult.
Yeah, they
Just
do.
be kind.
They
Just be
do.
kind and love others and listen to their stories and don't discount their lived experiences. I think that's the important thing, is that a lot of the things that we're seeing in this world is people aren't taking into account people's actual lived experiences. And it's so important to give credit to those stories and honor them, because people feel the way that they do because it's been their experience. It's not just
Mhm.
some made up thing,
Yeah.
right? And that's for all communities, um, in all marginalized communities. They've experienced things that have caused these movements, and there's a reason behind all of them. Find out what those reasons are. Don't just assume like, oh, this next person's wanting attention or they're wanting. No, there's a reason why
Yep.
all of these things are happening. There's a reason why Black Lives Matter happened. There's a reason why anti-Semitism is at the forefront of conversations. There's a reason why LGBTQ community is still fighting for rights. There's a reason why women are still fighting for the rights.
Yep.
There's a reason for all of these things. It's not just us wanting to hear ourselves talk, right? So just take into account what someone's experience maybe before you comment, and also just talk to people. I think it's
Yeah.
very, very important. Like we talked about, just conversations and learning to converse and listening,
Yeah.
because again, it is lost.
Yeah. And the lack of assumption making.
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
That, like, the assuming that goes on is like, "Well, I heard this once
Wild.
somewhere." Cool. Now let's engage with, like, what is or what you're
Right.
hearing now in this moment.
And
I get
accept
it.
that those assumptions are wrong. Like, it's
Exactly,
okay. Yeah.
exactly, or accept that those assumptions were okay back then and are no longer
Right.
now. Like, I think
Right.
that too, it's like, the fear of being able to morph with
Yes.
the culture, and to recognize
Mhm.
that things were done 10, 20, even 5 years ago
Yes.
that were quote unquote "okay" then, and now they're
Yeah.
not. And
Yeah.
people can own, "I made that mistake back then." Yes. Was that like part of what was going on and people were excusing it? Sure, but now would never. Like, I think
Right.
people are able to also learn from their mistakes. They're able to grow and change if that is actually something that they're trying to do, and like give people that space to do it, but don't make
Yeah.
assumptions. Like,
Yeah.
oh my god, yeah, I can
Yeah.
clearly I have a lot of feelings about that.
Yes. No, I'm with you though. I mean, and here's the thing, and this is where empathy comes in with those people. Change is scary. It is.
Yeah,
I get it. Change is scary. However, if you look at our history, like nothing is the same. So we just have to accept that change is an inevitable thing
yeah.
and be
And it's
fine with
change
it.
is a constant, which is like that,
It's a
phrase, and
constant. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we just gotta get with the program.
yeah. Um, for anybody who does not currently follow you or wants to reach out or work with you or hire you, what within your boundaries is the best way for people to reach you?
Yeah, of course. So my website is melindahale.com, and you can find all things there. But all of my social media is just at Melinda Hale. Very, very simple. Instagram, I guess Twitter X or whatever, but I don't really use it as much
Okay.
anymore. Threads, TikTok, Facebook, all that. So yeah.
Thank you so much for
Of
going on this
course.
conversation with me. I know we didn't get into like the weeds about specific communities or about like the specific content you've posted or any of that, but I think for me, I'm really grateful for the breadth of outspoken content, I guess for a better word, like that you engage with and you create.
Yeah.
I want to like thank you on behalf of myself and arguably many other Jewish folks as well
Oh,
who have seen what you've posted. It's rare to have somebody who is not Jewish or of Jewish faith to speak out on behalf of these particular
yeah, that's
issues.
what I hear, which is wild, but
Yeah, and not to make this podcast about that necessarily, but, for me, that was my entry point for
Mm,
you, and it really means a lot to have people who are not of your community speaking on behalf of your community
absolutely.
when it comes from a place of kindness and empathy and non-judgment and, desire for inclusivity, and
Yeah.
it really does have a huge ripple effect, and I imagine you also get a lot of vitriol for it, and so I just want to, like, affirm that there are people like myself who are hearing it and receiving it, and it is allowing us to continue to, believe that there are good folks out there who aren't just within our own little sphere, and that we're not just fighting for that for ourselves, so I just
Yeah.
wanna publicly say thank you on
You are
behalf of
very
that
welcome.
particular cause from me.
You're very
Um,
welcome.
so thank you.
Of
And
course.
just generally how you're speaking, I really think you are a lesson for many in how to engage in these worlds with kindness and empathy and active listening and a lack of assumption. So continue doing what you're doing across all of the things, including in your art. And I'm really grateful for you giving time to our space and our community in this way. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.